You're checking social media when explosive new information drops about the Wendy Osefo insurance fraud case that nobody saw coming. Ashley Darby's name has surfaced in the investigation. The revelation came through court documents filed by prosecutors as part of their case against Wendy and Eddie Osefo. Buried in hundreds of pages of evidence submissions was a reference to communications between Wendy Osefo and Ashley Darby that occurred in the weeks before and after the alleged fake burglary. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Real Housewives of Potomac fanbase, as Ashley had been one of the most vocal castmates mocking Wendy after her arrest. According to the documents, investigators had recovered text messages and phone records showing multiple exchanges between Wendy and Ashley during the critical time frame when the burglary was supposedly being planned and executed. The nature of these communications wasn't fully detailed in the public filings, but prosecutors indicated they were relevant to establishing the timeline and intent behind the alleged fraud scheme. The vague language left room for speculation about exactly what role Ashley might have played. The timing of Ashley's communications with Wendy was particularly suspicious. Phone records showed that Ashley had contacted Wendy just days before the couple left for their Jamaica vacation, and again, within hours of when Wendy claimed to have discovered the burglary upon returning home. The pattern suggested Ashley had knowledge of events as they were unfolding, raising questions about whether she had been informed in advance about plans or had been contacted immediately after the supposed crime. Most damning were references in the court documents to what prosecutors described as inconsistent statements provided by Ashley Darby during her interview with investigators. When questioned about her relationship with Wendy and any knowledge of the burglary, Ashley had apparently given answers that didn't align with evidence recovered from phones and other sources. The inconsistencies suggested Ashley might have been trying to minimize or hide her knowledge of the situation. Legal experts analyzing the court filings noted that prosecutors wouldn't have included references to Ashley's communications unless they believed those exchanges were relevant to proving their case against Wendy. The inclusion suggested that whatever Ashley and Wendy discussed could potentially demonstrate Wendy's state of mind, advanced planning, or consciousness of guilt. Some legal analysts speculated that Ashley might have unwittingly provided evidence that supported the prosecution's theory about premeditation. The revelation was particularly shocking given Ashley's very public mockery of Wendy after the arrest. Her Instagram post about catching felonies, not melodies, now took on a different tone, knowing that she had been in communication with Wendy around the time of the alleged fraud. The apparent hypocrisy of mocking someone while potentially having knowledge about their activities struck many observers as deeply problematic and raised questions about Ashley's own involvement. Social media erupted with speculation about what exactly Ashley knew and when she knew it. Fans of RHOP began dissecting every interaction between Ashley and Wendy shown on the show, looking for hints that Ashley might have had inside knowledge about Wendy's financial situation or the burglary scheme. Old clips were re-examined with new suspicion about whether Ashley's comments or behavior suggested she knew more than she was letting on. The revelation also called into question Ashley's credibility and judgment. If she had knowledge of a serious crime being planned or committed and didn't report it to authorities, that raised both legal and ethical concerns. Even if her involvement was limited to simply knowing about the scheme without participating, her failure to report it could potentially make her legally liable as an accessory after the fact. As news of Ashley Darby's connection to Wendy's fraud scheme spread, additional details began emerging that painted a more complete picture of the relationship between the two housewives during the critical period around the alleged crime. Sources close to the investigation revealed that the text messages between Ashley and Wendy weren't just casual friendly check-ins but included discussions about money, financial stress, and insurance matters. While the exact content of the messages remains sealed as part of the ongoing investigation, the general topics suggested the conversations were more substantive than simple reality TV co-star small talk. The financial discussions were particularly relevant given that Wendy's alleged motive for the fraud was mounting debt and pressure to maintain her lifestyle. Investigators had also discovered that Ashley and Wendy had met in person at least twice in the month before the alleged burglary, meetings that neither woman had initially disclosed when questioned. The undisclosed meetings raised red flags for investigators who were trying to piece together who Wendy might have confided in about her financial problems or plans. The fact that both women had apparently downplayed their contact during that period suggested they might have had reasons to hide the extent of their interactions. Phone records showed that one of Ashley's calls to Wendy occurred within an hour of when Wendy first reported the burglary to police. The timing suggested Ashley either had advanced knowledge that Wendy would be reporting a crime, or that Wendy had contacted her immediately after making the false report. Either scenario indicated a level of involvement or knowledge that went beyond what Ashley had claimed in her initial statements to investigators. Most concerning were reports that Ashley had been present at Wendy's home at some point between when the couple returned from Jamaica and when they reported the burglary to police. Neighbors interviewed by investigators mentioned seeing a woman matching Ashley's description at the property during that window, though they couldn't be certain of the exact timing or the purpose of the visit. If Ashley had been at the house during the period when the burglary scene was supposedly being discovered or before it was reported, her presence raised serious questions about what she observed and what she might have known. Bank records examined by investigators showed that Ashley had received a payment from Wendy in the weeks following the insurance claims being filed. The amount wasn't publicly disclosed, but sources indicated it was substantial enough to be noteworthy in the investigation. The payment could have been for legitimate purposes unrelated to the fraud, but its timing in relation to the insurance claims made it relevant to investigators looking at who might have benefited from or been involved in the scheme. Prosecutors were reportedly considering whether to charge Ashley as an accessory or co-conspirator, depending on what additional evidence they uncovered about her knowledge and involvement. The legal standard for accessory charges required proof that Ashley knew about the crime and took actions to help Wendy avoid detection or benefit from the scheme. If the evidence showed she simply knew about the fraud but didn't actively participate or assist, the legal case against her would be weaker but still potentially viable. Ashley's attorney issued a brief statement denying any wrongdoing and characterizing her client's contact with Wendy as normal friendship between castmates who were going through the usual drama of reality TV. The statement emphasized that Ashley had cooperated with investigators and that her communications with Wendy were innocent and had been taken out of context by people looking to expand the scandal. The defensive tone of the statement suggested Ashley's legal team was concerned about the direction the investigation was heading. Legal experts noted that even if Ashley wasn't charged criminally, she could face civil liability if Wendy's insurance fraud convictions went forward, and evidence showed Ashley had participated in or facilitated the scheme in any way. The insurance companies that were defrauded could potentially sue anyone who helped execute or conceal the fraud to recover their losses. Civil liability had a lower burden of proof than criminal charges and could result in substantial financial judgments against Ashley. The revelation of Ashley's potential involvement complicated the narrative around Wendy's case dramatically. What had seemed like a straightforward case of a desperate housewife committing insurance fraud was now looking potentially like a conspiracy involving multiple people. The expansion of the investigation raised questions about whether other cast members or associates might also have had knowledge of or involvement in the scheme. While the reality TV community reeled from the revelation of Ashley Darby's connection to the fraud scheme, one person was unsurprised and eager to say she had seen this coming all along. Kiarna Stewart, who had been vindicated by Wendy's arrest, now claimed she had information about Ashley's involvement that she had been holding back until the right time. In a series of videos posted after the court documents revealed Ashley's communications with Wendy, Kiarna alleged that she had known for months that Ashley was in on it and had been waiting for investigators to uncover the connection themselves. Kiarna's content detailing Ashley's alleged involvement was explosive and specific. She claimed that Ashley had been helping Wendy plan the insurance fraud for weeks before it was executed, providing advice based on her own knowledge of insurance claims and how investigations worked. According to Kiarna, Ashley had encouraged Wendy to file with multiple insurance companies to maximize the payout, and had even helped compile the list of supposedly stolen items to make the claims more believable. The allegations went further, with Kiarna suggesting that Ashley's motive for helping wasn't just friendship but financial benefit. Kiarna claimed that Ashley and Wendy had an arrangement where Ashley would receive a percentage of the insurance payout in exchange for her assistance in planning and executing the fraud. The payment that showed up in bank records was, according to Kiarna, Ashley's cut of the money Wendy had received from one of the insurance companies before investigators caught on to the scheme. Kiarna provided receipts to support her claims, including screenshots of messages from sources who allegedly had inside knowledge of conversations between Ashley and Wendy. While the screenshots didn't show direct communications between the two housewives, they showed third parties discussing what Ashley had supposedly told them about helping Wendy with an insurance thing. The indirect evidence was circumstantial but painted a picture consistent with Kiarna's allegations. Most damning was Kiarna's claim that she had warned investigators about Ashley's involvement early in their investigation into Wendy. She stated that when she provided information about Wendy's fraud scheme, she had also mentioned Ashley's name as someone who might have relevant knowledge or involvement. Kiarna suggested that investigators had initially focused on Wendy and Eddie, but were now circling back to look more closely at Ashley based on what they were finding in communications and financial records. Kiarna's tone in discussing Ashley's alleged involvement was gleeful and vindictive. She referenced the Catching Felonies Not Melodies post that Ashley had made mocking Wendy, pointing out the irony that Ashley might end up catching her own felony charges for helping Wendy commit the very crime she was publicly mocking. The schadenfreude was evident as Kiarna reveled in what she characterized as Ashley's impending downfall. The content Kiarna produced about Ashley's involvement was some of her most viewed material since the original news of Wendy's arrest. Her audience was riveted by the expansion of the scandal to include another housewife, and many commenters expressed shock that Ashley could have been involved while simultaneously mocking Wendy publicly. The apparent deception and hypocrisy made the story even more compelling than if Ashley had simply been supportive or silent. Kayarna also addressed speculation about why Ashley would risk her own career and freedom to help Wendy commit insurance fraud. She suggested that Ashley's own financial situation might not be as stable as she portrayed on television, and that the money she stood to gain from helping Wendy was significant enough to motivate taking the risk. Kayarna referenced Ashley's ongoing divorce proceedings and the financial complications that could create, suggesting financial desperation might have made her willing to participate in the scheme. The response to Kayarna's allegations was mixed. Her supporters believed everything she said and praised her for being right once again about housewives behaving badly. Critics argued that Kayarna was making serious accusations without definitive proof, and that her desire for attention and validation was leading her to overstate Ashley's involvement based on limited evidence. The debate played out across social media platforms as people tried to determine how credible Kayarna's claims were. And now viewers found themselves asking a troubling question. If someone helps plan a crime and profits from it, but then publicly mocks the person who got caught, does that level of deception and betrayal make them even worse than the original perpetrator? Ashley Darby's response to the allegations about her involvement in Wendy's fraud scheme was swift, defensive, and increasingly panicked as more information continued to emerge. Her initial statement through her attorney had been measured and generic, but as Kayarna's specific allegations gained traction and more details leaked about what investigators had found, Ashley's tone became more desperate. She posted a lengthy statement on Instagram denying any involvement in or knowledge of Wendy's alleged insurance fraud, characterizing the accusations as attempts to drag her into a situation she had nothing to do with. The Instagram statement was notable for what it revealed about Ashley's concern. She specifically addressed the financial payment that had come from Wendy, explaining it as repayment for a personal loan Ashley had given Wendy months earlier. When Wendy mentioned having temporary cash flow problems, Ashley emphasized that the loan had been documented and that she had receipts proving the money was legitimate debt repayment rather than payment for assistance with fraud. The defensive explanation suggested Ashley's legal team was very concerned about how that transaction would be interpreted. Ashley also addressed the text messages and phone calls that court documents had referenced, claiming they were normal, friendly communication between castmates, and that she and Wendy had been discussing personal matters unrelated to any burglary or insurance claims. She insisted that she had been completely shocked when news of Wendy's arrest broke, and that she had no advance knowledge of any criminal activity. The emphatic denials struck many observers as potentially protesting too much. Most tellingly, Ashley announced she was taking a break from social media to focus on her legal situation and her family. The sudden social media withdrawal was a dramatic change from her typically very active online presence, and suggested she had been advised by attorneys to limit what she said publicly while the investigation continued. The timing of the break, coming right after allegations of her involvement surfaced, made it look like she was hiding rather than confidently asserting her innocence. Behind the scenes, sources indicated Ashley had hired additional legal representation beyond her usual attorneys, bringing on a criminal defense specialist with experience in fraud and conspiracy cases. The legal team was reportedly advising her to prepare for the possibility of being charged as an accessory or co-conspirator depending on what evidence prosecutors ultimately felt they could prove. The level of legal firepower Ashley was assembling suggested she and her attorneys viewed the threat as serious. Ashley's fellow RHOP cast members were notably silent about the allegations of her involvement, creating a vacuum that fueled speculation about what they might know or suspect. The lack of public support from castmates was striking, particularly given that reality TV stars often rally around each other during controversies. The silence suggested either that the other housewives didn't want to be associated with potentially criminal behavior, or that they had their own suspicions about Ashley's involvement that made them reluctant to defend her. Reports emerged that Bravo was considering suspending Ashley from filming pending the outcome of the investigation into her potential involvement. The network had already distanced itself from Wendy after her arrest, and the possibility that a second cast member might be implicated in the same fraud scheme created significant concerns about the show's reputation. Network executives were reportedly in discussions about how to handle the situation if Ashley ended up being charged. Ashley's ex-husband Michael Darby, with whom she was in ongoing divorce proceedings, reportedly saw the fraud allegations as potentially relevant to their custody and financial disputes. Sources close to Michael indicated he was monitoring the situation closely and might use any criminal charges against Ashley as evidence that she was an unfit parent or that her financial desperation made her unstable. The personal consequences of the allegations extended beyond potential criminal liability to affect every aspect of Ashley's life. The difference between Ashley's situation and Wendy's was that Ashley hadn't been arrested or formally charged with anything yet. However, the fact that prosecutors had included references to her in court documents and that investigators had interviewed her about her communications with Wendy suggested she was very much under scrutiny. Legal experts noted that prosecutors often investigated potential co-conspirators thoroughly before deciding whether to file charges, so Ashley's current status didn't necessarily mean she was in the clear. Financial records became a focus of intense speculation, as observers tried to determine whether the payment from Wendy to Ashley was really a loan repayment or something more suspicious. The timing of the payment from Mindset, coming after Wendy had received money from at least one insurance company, made it look potentially like a distribution of proceeds from the fraud. If prosecutors could prove Ashley knew the money came from fraudulent insurance claims, that knowledge could form the basis for criminal charges even if she hadn't actively participated in staging the burglary. People watching Ashley's increasingly desperate responses started questioning something that made them uncomfortable. At what point does someone's panic denials actually make them look more guilty than if they had stayed quiet and let the investigation play out? As the investigation into Ashley Darby's potential involvement continued, other Real Housewives of Potomac cast members found themselves in the uncomfortable position of being asked about what they knew regarding the relationship between Ashley and Wendy during the relevant time period. Gazelle Bryant, who had been involved in various conflicts with both Ashley and Wendy over the years, addressed the situation during an appearance on a popular podcast. She carefully avoided making direct accusations but noted that she had observed Ashley and Wendy being unusually close in the months before Wendy's arrest, which had struck her as odd given their historically contentious relationship on the show. Gazelle's comments suggested there had been noticeable changes in the dynamic between Ashley and Wendy that other cast members had observed. Robin Dixon took a more cautious approach, stating that she didn't want to speculate about Ashley's involvement, but that she hoped the truth would come out through the legal process. Her measured response was notable for its lack of the strong support one might expect if she truly believed Ashley was innocent. The diplomatic neutrality suggested Robin might have her own questions about what Ashley knew or did. Candy Dillard was more direct, posting on social media that she wasn't surprised by revelations about Ashley's possible involvement and that Ashley's history of questionable behavior had always made her suspicious. The comment reignited their long-standing feud while also adding to the pile of castmates who weren't rushing to Ashley's defense. The lack of solidarity among the cast was striking and suggested that Ashley had burned bridges that might have otherwise provided support. Behind the scenes, production sources indicated that several cast members had been questioned by investigators about their observations of Ashley and Wendy's relationship during filming and off-camera. The interviews were voluntary, and the cast members weren't considered suspects, but their observations about interactions, conversations, and behavior patterns could potentially provide context for the evidence prosecutors were building. The involvement of other cast members in the investigation demonstrated how far-reaching the inquiry had become. The group dynamics on RHAP had always been complicated, with shifting alliances and feuds that played out both on camera and in real life. However, the introduction of serious criminal allegations transformed the typical reality TV drama into something with genuine legal and personal consequences. Cast members who might normally have enjoyed the drama found themselves in the uncomfortable position of potentially being witnesses in a criminal case. Filming for the next season of RHOP was scheduled to begin soon, but production was reportedly on hold pending resolution of the legal issues involving Wendy and potentially Ashley. The show couldn't move forward with its typical format when two cast members were dealing with serious fraud allegations. Network executives were considering various options, including proceeding without Wendy and Ashley, incorporating their legal troubles into the storyline, or potentially delaying the season until the situation resolved. The other housewives faced difficult decisions about how to navigate the situation professionally. Publicly supporting Ashley risked being associated with potentially criminal behavior, but not supporting her could be seen as disloyal or opportunistic. The calculations about how to respond revealed the complicated intersection of friendship, business relationships, and legal concerns that reality TV created. Karen Huger, often considered the grand dame of RHOP, provided perhaps the most diplomatic response by stating that she hoped everyone involved would face appropriate consequences for their actions, but that she wouldn't prejudge the situation before all facts were known. Her measured approach acknowledged the seriousness of the allegations while avoiding taking a position that might later prove embarrassing. The political nature of her response reflected years of navigating reality TV drama. Discussion among the cast and in production meetings reportedly included concerns about how Ashley's potential involvement would be addressed on the show if she remained part of the cast. Could they realistically film with her while a criminal investigation was ongoing? Would it be appropriate to discuss the legal situation on camera, or would that create additional legal risks? The unprecedented nature of having potentially two cast members involved in the same fraud scheme created complications that standard reality TV protocols weren't designed to handle. The situation also raised questions about Bravo's due diligence in casting and monitoring the financial situations of housewives on their shows. While the network couldn't be expected to know about or prevent every instance of bad behavior by cast members, the fact that financial pressures had allegedly driven serious criminal conduct raised questions about whether the pressure to portray wealth and success on these shows created dangerous incentives, and viewers watching the cast navigate this situation found themselves considering when your coworkers or friends become entangled in serious legal trouble, How do you balance loyalty with protecting yourself from association with their choices? The legal implications of Ashley Darby's potential involvement in Wendy's insurance fraud scheme became clearer as prosecutors continued building their case and legal experts analyzed what charges she might face if evidence supported prosecution. Criminal defense attorneys not involved in the case explained that accessory or conspiracy charges would require prosecutors to prove Ashley had knowledge of the fraud and took actions to facilitate or conceal it. The text messages, phone calls, and financial transactions being examined by investigators could potentially establish that knowledge, but proving Ashley actively participated in planning or executing the scheme required more than just communication with Wendy during the relevant time period. The financial payment from Wendy to Ashley was particularly significant from a legal standpoint. If prosecutors could prove that money came directly from fraudulent insurance proceeds and that Ashley knew it was connected to the fake burglary, that knowledge could establish her as having benefited from the crime. Accepting money derived from fraud even after the fact could support charges of being an accessory after the fact or receiving stolen property. Legal experts noted that Ashley's public mockery of Wendy after the arrest could actually work against her if charges were filed. The posts mocking Wendy could be interpreted as attempts to distance herself from someone she had actually helped, creating a false impression that she had no connection to the crimes. Prosecutors might argue the public disavowal was part of a cover-up strategy designed to prevent investigators from looking at Ashley's involvement. The inconsistencies in Ashley's initial statements to investigators were another significant legal problem. When someone lies to or misleads investigators during a criminal inquiry, even if those lies are about seemingly peripheral matters, it can form the basis for obstruction of justice charges separate from the underlying crime. If Ashley had minimized her contact with Wendy or misrepresented the nature of their communications during her interview with investigators, she could face charges for those false statements regardless of whether prosecutors could prove she participated in the actual fraud. Civil liability remained a concern, even if criminal charges never materialized. The insurance companies that paid out on Wendy's fraudulent claims had strong financial incentives to recover their losses by pursuing anyone who participated in or benefited from the scheme. Civil cases had a lower burden of proof than criminal prosecutions, requiring only a preponderance of evidence rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Ashley could find herself facing substantial civil judgments even if prosecutors decided not to pursue criminal charges. The reputational and professional damage Ashley was experiencing was severe regardless of legal outcomes. Bravo's apparent consideration of removing her from RHOP meant potentially losing her primary source of income and public platform. Brand partnerships and sponsorships that supplemented Housewives' income were already being terminated as companies didn't want association with someone potentially involved in fraud. The financial consequences of the allegations alone were substantial and immediate. Ashley's divorce proceedings with Michael Darby became even more contentious as the fraud allegations emerged. Michael's attorneys were reportedly seeking to use the criminal investigation as justification for limiting Ashley's custody time and reducing any financial settlements. Claims that Ashley's judgment was impaired or that she had committed crimes could influence how family court judges viewed custody and support determinations. The interconnection between criminal investigations and family court matters created additional pressure. Legal analysts following the case noted that the timeline for potential charges against Ashley was uncertain. Prosecutors might wait until after Wendy's case concluded to determine how evidence from that trial affected the case against Ashley. Alternatively, they might charge Ashley separately if they felt they had sufficient evidence to proceed independently. The uncertainty created a period of prolonged stress for Ashley as she waited to learn whether formal charges would be filed. The possibility of Ashley facing criminal charges had broader implications for the reality TV industry and how networks handled cast members with potential legal problems. Bravo and other networks were reportedly reviewing their contracts and protocols to determine what obligations they had to investigate cast members' legal troubles and whether they could or should terminate people based on allegations before convictions. The legal and ethical issues were complex and without clear precedents. Friends and family members of Ashley who were interviewed by media outlets expressed shock at the allegations and insisted Ashley wasn't capable of participating in insurance fraud. However, their defenses were often qualified with admissions that they didn't know all the details of Ashley's relationship with Wendy or what communications might have occurred. The cautious nature of even supportive statements suggested people in Ashley's circle were uncertain about what she might have done. And people following this legal drama started wrestling with a question that highlighted the stakes. If helping someone commit fraud can destroy your career, reputation, and freedom, what would ever make that risk seem worth taking? Months after Ashley Darby's connection to Wendy's fraud scheme first surfaced, the situation had evolved into a prolonged legal and personal nightmare with no clear resolution in sight. Prosecutors had not yet filed formal charges against Ashley, but sources indicated the investigation into her involvement remained active and ongoing. The The lack of charges provided temporary relief but also created continued uncertainty as Ashley couldn't move forward with her life while the possibility of prosecution hung over her. Legal experts suggested prosecutors might be waiting to see the outcome of Wendy's trial before making final decisions about whether to charge Ashley based on what evidence and testimony emerged during those proceedings. The professional consequences for Ashley had been devastating even without formal charges. Bravo had officially suspended her participation in RHOP, releasing a statement that they would reassess her status once the legal situation was fully resolved. The indefinite suspension effectively ended Ashley's reality TV career for the foreseeable future, eliminating her primary income source and the platform that had defined her public identity for years. Financial pressures mounted as Ashley's legal fees accumulated while her income disappeared. The criminal defense attorneys she had hired were expensive, and the ongoing nature of the investigation meant those costs would continue for months or potentially years. The divorce proceedings with Michael had stalled as both sides dealt with the complications created by the fraud investigation, leaving Ashley's financial future uncertain on multiple fronts. The impact on Ashley's family was profound and heartbreaking. Her children were old enough to be aware that their mother was in serious trouble, and the public nature of the allegations meant they would face questions and potential bullying from peers. Co-parenting with Michael became even more difficult, as the fraud allegations gave him ammunition in custody disputes. The family consequences of Ashley's alleged involvement extended far beyond her own legal jeopardy. Kiarna Stewart maintained her position that she had been right about Ashley's involvement and continued producing content analyzing every development in the case. Her vindication about Wendy's fraud had been followed by apparent vindication about Ashley's connection, establishing her credibility as someone who accurately assessed the housewives she covered. The growth of Kiarna's platform as a result of being proven right repeatedly created a strange dynamic where she was building a career partially on documenting the destruction of others' lives. The relationship between Ashley and Wendy had reportedly become hostile as each woman's legal team advised minimizing contact and potentially preparing to testify against the other if prosecutors offered deals. The friendship or alliance that had apparently existed between them during the planning and execution of the fraud had been destroyed by the consequences they now faced. The breakdown of trust between co-conspirators was a predictable outcome that created additional complications for both women's legal situations. Other RHOP cast members had largely moved on with their lives and careers, filming a new season without Wendy or Ashley, and dealing with the typical reality TV drama that seemed trivial compared to fraud charges and criminal investigations. The show was reportedly incorporating references to the legal situations without making them the central focus, acknowledging the elephant in the room while not allowing it to dominate the content. The contrast between those facing potential prison time and those arguing about dinner parties highlighted how dramatically different outcomes were for people involved in the same show. The insurance companies that had been defrauded continued their own investigations and legal proceedings separate from the criminal cases. Civil lawsuits had been filed against Wendy and Eddie, and sources indicated Ashley might be added as a defendant if evidence supported claims that she benefited from or participated in the fraud. The multi-layered legal consequences meant that even if criminal charges were never filed, the civil liability could be substantial and long-lasting. Legal experts following the case noted that the prolonged investigation without charges against Ashley created a legal limbo that was psychologically difficult, but also legally strategic. Prosecutors might be using the extended timeline to pressure Ashley to cooperate against Wendy in exchange for immunity from prosecution. The possibility of flipping Ashley to testify about the planning and execution of the fraud could make the case against Wendy stronger, while allowing prosecutors to avoid the difficulty of proving Ashley's involvement to the level required for conviction. The cultural conversation around the case had evolved from shock and schadenfreude to more reflective discussions about the pressures that reality TV created, and how those pressures could drive people to make catastrophic choices. The fact that two housewives were potentially facing prison time for insurance fraud committed to maintain appearances for television highlighted broader questions about the genre's impact on participants. Mental health professionals and media critics used the case to argue for reforms in how reality TV treated and protected cast members. As time passed without resolution, both Ashley and Wendy faced the reality that their lives had been permanently altered regardless of legal outcomes. The damage to their reputations, relationships, and careers had already occurred and would never be fully undone even if they avoided prison. The prolonged uncertainty created its own form of punishment as they waited to learn whether formal consequences would add to the informal ones they were already experiencing. And people who had followed this entire saga from Wendy's arrest through the revelation of Ashley's involvement couldn't help but reflect on a final sobering truth. When the pressure to maintain appearances leads not just one but multiple people to risk everything in fraudulent schemes, what does that say about the culture that created those pressures and rewarded those appearances in the first place?